pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please silence your cell phones. And next is the approval of the agenda. We have a blue agenda item. We're going to add it to the consent agenda. It is the grant for the HAVA grant for the election security.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the consent agenda with the additional item.
I move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And next is public appearances. Would anybody like to address the board at this point? Please come up to the microphone and state your name. We generally limit our public appearances to 3 minutes. Yeah, you know the drill.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Jerome George. I'm here a month later to inquire about any information you may have received from the county attorney regarding the land on Swan Lake that interests me. If you'll recall, a month ago I made a pitch for the commission to consider putting some land up for bid, and I've not gotten any response or found any more information than I had a month ago, so I'm wondering if you have any.
I don't.
Madam Chair, Mr. George was indicated by county staff previously that the county does not own the land. I can certainly send him a letter confirming that, but that information had previously been provided to him, but we can send him a letter indicating that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional public appearances? Seeing none, we'll move on to Sheriff Lang and the armor radio upgrades under the ARPA funding.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. This is, I guess, a continuation of the board workshop that we had last week, where I advised I was putting a proposal together to replace 159 radios in the county that are at end of life for the Sheriff's Office, Public Works, and then the 3 rural fire departments and the 1 ambulance service. And the total for that replacement of all those radios is $736,623. And my intent was to submit that in the process for the ARPA funding. And I think it was just advised to bring it in front of the board here for your blessing to submit that application, which already has taken place.
I move approval.
I'll second. I've got a question for the sheriff.
All right, Commissioner Kolarz, your question?
Thank you, Dave, for being here. You and I were both there when Armor started back 12, 13 years ago.
Correct.
Remind us, how was it funded in the first place?
The first place it was funded, a lot of the fire departments got firefighter grants for, I don't know if it was 50% of theirs, and then the county covered the remaining of the cost for all the entities in the county, which included at that time the cities of North Mankato, St. Peter, the fire departments and those, and police department, and also Gustavus.
Right, and I think, Terry, you might have been at the legislature at that time. And the expected life expectancy of these tools?
Motorola has a 10-year expectancy on these. I mean, they'll last longer than that, but they're not supported by Motorola anymore. So if any of the current radios break down or aren't functioning properly, Motorola does not support them anymore. And then another piece of that is there's a mandate being discussed between the FBI and BCA to require all CGIS information to be encrypted, which our currently radios don't have the capability to do that. These new radios would meet that standard as well.
And Madam Chair, if I may, what that means is people who like to listen to radio traffic won't be able to decipher what is being said, or will just not be there because it's being encrypted
Correct.
for the safety of the
For the
enforcement agencies.
For the safety of the users, and the information that is transmitted is, some of it is private information according to the FBI standards.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the legislature having a bill. Do you think that could get credited? Have you heard anything new?
I haven't heard where that current bill is at the legislators. I know that they are proposing a $250 million funding for armor upgrades statewide. You know, and that's a statewide. Even if $250 million is approved in that bill, obviously it would only cover a portion of what we are talking about here.
And the price increase is coming, thus the
Correct.
urgency.
Yep.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Not a question, but just a comment. I think that maybe, I don't remember who brought it about, for future budgeting, that we know if these things have a 10 or so year life cycle, the wisdom of having kind of a placeholder, whatever you called it, each year, so we don't get hit in 10 years with another.
Right. You know, prior to Commissioner Kemp passing, we've discussed that several budget cycles, that, you know, we need to start sticking some money away, or knowing that, you know, when these radios die, we're going to end up having to spend they're about $4,000 to $5,000 a piece, you know, so to have a dollar figure set aside to eventually replace them down the road. And then if, you know, Motorola in 10 years down the road no longer supports the ones that we're currently going to replace, then we should have a plan in place down the road to upgrade as well.
If I recall correctly, interoperability, I think, was the word I kept hearing in 2010, 2011.
Yep.
Has that been a tremendous benefit?
It has. I mean, we're, for the most part, able to communicate with, you know, all of our surrounding partners. Now when I have somebody on a transport to northern Minnesota, they can still talk back to my dispatch center, which, you know, prior to the armor system being in place, we didn't have that capability. When another surrounding agency calls for assistance, we're able to go over there and they can patch the two channels together. So it definitely has benefited, you know, interoperability amongst all the responders.
Thank you.
In addition, Madam Chair, to what Commissioner Morrow was talking about, I remember too there being some silo effect in school buildings or other where always you couldn't communicate with the folks inside. How has that been addressed over the years?
Those certain structures that, you know, the reception is poor have, for the most part, been addressed. They've put in boosters in a lot of those facilities. And the schools in Nicollet County actually all have an armor radio as well, so they have that direct communication with my dispatch as well.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is Public Works and the Annual Agricultural Inspector's Report. Weeds, seeds, and other things, correct?
That's right. Good morning. In your packet, you should have a copy of the 2021 annual report and the work plan summary for 2022. This is the annual report I submit every spring, late winter, kind of as a recap of what was done last year as well as what's planned for this year. A lot of the duties, of course, stay the same, and the hours and obligations are for the most part the same. Some time changes here and there. Seed inspection amount changes. Of course, during COVID it was a bit lower just because co-ops and facilities weren't allowing visitors. So that impacted some of the activity there, but as far as weed inspection enforcement has remained pretty constant over the years. If you have any questions on the hours spent on certain activities, I'll answer them. Otherwise, one particular thing people are interested in is the last page, what the county has spent on noxious weed enforcement. Kind of a snapshot of time, equipment, labor, materials. The materials mainly is, I suppose, parts for the equipment, but it's mainly comprised of herbicide for spraying noxious weeds.
Any questions for Nathan?
And most of that is in road ditches?
Yep,
And-
these numbers are directly from the highway department with their own spray unit from spraying road right away.
And then what about you?
My spraying is just the ditches for brush and trees, so that's not included in here. I don't go out and spray weeds at all.
And does that go back to the landowner or the
Yep,
ditch authority?
that gets assessed to the ditch system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion to accept the report?
Move to accept and thank Nate for all his hard work.
Second and second.
Any additional questions or comments?
I just have one additional kind of comment or update here. Last fall, November, you might have read about it in the Free Press, or maybe KYC did an article on it. Emerald ash borer was found in Nicollet County in Lafayette Township. So Nicollet County's been put on a quarantine, which essentially means you just can't move firewood outside of the county without it being treated. And if you were to ever buy wood at like a gas station or something, you'd see it's MDA approved, where it's been heated to a certain temperature to kill any potential larvae or bugs that would be in it. So that's what that means, and now we're part of that. And a little bit more on EAB. It came into the U.S., I believe, in around 2009 through a port in Detroit, Michigan, and it was from Asia, and it came in through some wood packing material. And since 2009, it's been slowly spreading to the south and east through natural bug movement and transportation of wood and hardwood material. So now it's here in Nicollet County. It's in 31 other counties in Minnesota, and the only real way to get ahead of it and stop it is to cut down the ash trees, which a lot of cities have them planted in the boulevards. So it's a big job to cut them down. You can treat them, but to treat the tree repetitively year after year gets costly, and it's just not as effective as cutting the tree down and planting something else.
Madam Chair. So is this kind of just an area close to New Ulm, or don't we really know where the...
Well, it's off. Yeah, yep. It's off of actually just north of the river by State Highway 15.
Okay.
That's where it's been found. It's very likely it's other places. So what happens is the bug will lay eggs in the tree, and that larva will then burrow through the cambium layer of bark, essentially killing the tree. That's where it transports all its nutrients. So a good way to look for it is find a dead ash tree, and if it's got any woodpecker damage, you know they're in there working for something. So that's where it's been confirmed. It's highly likely that it's other places, but
There's a lot of contiguous forest
right.
to that area.
Yep. Yep.
Any additional comments? All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Next on our agenda is public services. Set the date for the public hearing for the Nicollet County Redistricting Plan. Jackie?
Morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. As you know, Nicollet County is in the process of completing its redistricting plan as a result of the 2020 census. The county board is required by Minnesota State Statute 375.025 to conduct a public hearing before acting on the plan to redistrict. The purpose of this hearing is to consider the plan for redistricting of county commissioner districts. Adopting the Nicollet County Commissioner Redistricting Plan requires a 3-week notice before action can be taken at a public meeting. I am recommending that the county board set the public hearing to consider the plan for redistricting for county commissioner for April 19th at 9 o'clock. This would be a special meeting for that day. And then set the same time to consider the adoption of the Nicollet County Commissioner Redistricting Plan after the public hearing. So today I'd be looking for a motion to approve the date of that public hearing on April 19th at 9 o'clock at a special meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Sounds like it's all rolling as it should.
Thank you. All those in favor?
All right.
Aye. And then I do have one other comment on that we are planning an open house for public comment and inspection of the plans that are presented from our office on April 4th from 4 to 6 here in the court, the boardroom. We will be getting that plan out and then doing some advertising for that.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Next on our agenda is administration. Proclamation recognizing National County Government Month, April of 2022.
So, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. Each year, the month of April is recognized as National County Government Month. Each day, the nation's 3,069 counties provide essential services to more than 300 million people. Since 1991, the National Association of Counties, or NACO, has encouraged counties to use national county government as a time to elevate awareness of county responsibilities, programs, and services. And if I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to read the proclamation.
Please.
National County Government Month, April 2022, Counties Thrive. Whereas the nation's 3,069 counties, parishes, and boroughs, serving more than 315 million Americans, provide essential services to create healthy, safe, and vibrant communities. And whereas counties provide public health services, administer justice, keep communities safe, foster economic opportunities, and much more. And whereas Nicollet County and all counties take pride in our responsibility to protect and enhance the health, well-being, and safety of our residents in efficient and cost-effective ways. And whereas under the leadership of National Association of Counties President Larry Johnson, NACO is demonstrating how counties thrive, especially in supporting residents and businesses during the coronavirus pandemic. And whereas each year since 1991, the National Association of Counties has encouraged counties across the country to elevate awareness of county responsibilities, programs, and services. And whereas counties thrive through the use of technology, health and well-being, workforce readiness, strong infrastructure, caring for our vulnerable communities, and sustaining economic opportunities. And whereas the Nicollet County Board of Commissioners and all Nicollet County employees are committed to fulfilling the county's mission statement, providing efficient services with innovation and accountability. And now therefore be it resolved that the Nicollet County Board of Commissioners do hereby proclaim April 2022 as National County Government Month and encourage all county officials, employees, schools, and residents to participate in county government celebration activities, dated this 22nd day of March 2022. And
I'll move it.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Sarah, please call the roll.
Commissioner Kollars.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes.
Commissioner Lipke.
Yes.
Commissioner Morrow.
Yes.
Commissioner Drannell.
Yes, thank you.
In addition to that, we are also providing or planning for some activities each week to highlight all the department activities and encourage participation with our residents. So each year we hope to build off of this, but really this is an opportunity to enhance and share all the information that the counties do and the services that we provide. As in the last couple of years with the pandemic, it's been a little bit more difficult to interact with some of our residents, so we really want to take the opportunity to remind residents that we have these services available and then also acknowledge all the hard work that our staff has done over the last couple of years and continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the county attorney with the proclamation for Women's History Month.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Each year, the Women Celebrating Women Committee comes before the board and asks the board to proclaim March as Women's History Month, and I'm before you today asking for that proclamation. Would the chair prefer that I read it aloud?
Please.
Thank you. Proclamation. Whereas during Women's History Month we celebrate the many accomplishments of the women of Nicollet County, and whereas the theme for the 2022 Women's History Month celebration is Women Providing Healing, Promoting Hope, and whereas the April 5th, 2022 Women Celebrating Women event will recognize a local woman who has persisted in being a champion of providing healing and promoting hope. Now therefore be it resolved that the month of March be designated to celebrate the accomplishments of all women. Be it further resolved that the Nicollet County Board of Commissioners proclaims March 2022 as Women's History Month in Nicollet County, dated March 22nd, 2022.
So moved.
Thank you. I'll second that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I wasn't thinking.
Thinking just
We're good.
All right.
Thank you, Michelle. And the Women Celebrating Women event is April 5th, and I believe we have a table there. County government does, so.
And sorry, Madam Chair. If you're interested, the tickets are going fast, and so everyone is welcome to attend.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, please call the roll.
Commissioner Morrow,
Yes.
Commissioner Drano,
Yes.
Commissioner Lipke,
Yes.
Commissioner Kohlers.
Yes.
All right. Moving right along, next on our agenda is the county attorney update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was excited last week to have 2 community presentations after a long spell of not being out in the community because of COVID, to be doing as many presentations. There was a fraud presentation that the sheriff, myself, and Bonnie Peterson, our victim witness coordinator, presented in Cortland, and Commissioner Lipke was there as well. I think there was 35 or 38 people there, so it was a great discussion about ways of preventing fraud. Had another community presentation on the county attorney's office and domestic violence. That was 2 years in the making because it was originally scheduled in March of 2020, and so it was finally held last week. We are wrapping up the food drive and hope to announce this week the department that brought in the most food and cash donations for the St. Peter Food Shelf. And I hired, and she started, Roxanne Klein, a new assistant county attorney in my office. That is all the updates I have at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner committee reports. Commissioner Lepke.
Okay. Sat in on an infrastructure Zoom meeting, which was quite interesting. The country is really going to pot, according to them. We need 53 trillion in infrastructure updates. Worked at the farm show, which included the legislative forum. It was a workshop with the rest of you. Had a concerned citizen on the bottom road that Pete was very helpful with. Sat through Michelle's program and strongly recommend it. And Bonnie and Dave. Had some ditch concerns, and Nate has been helpful with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Morrow.
Let's see, Food Access Network, Aqua, an employee evaluation, Joint Powers Board for MVAC. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kohlers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Area Transportation Partnership, which covers all of District 7, met, and we discussed certainly the start of the Highway 14 project. There will be an open house tonight in Cortland at 6 p.m. for those who are interested in attending to see that. At our CHS Personnel Committee, Terry and I were both on that. Workshop to the County Board, Traverse to Sioux, Minnesota Valley Action Council Board last night. Thank you.
And I Region 9 Board of Directors meeting via Zoom, connecting Nicollet County panel on the basement. Department head board meeting, or department head board workshop. Whoever puts this on my calendar doesn't spell well. Region 9 revolving loan committee. We have some funds we need to get out quite quickly, or they have to go back to the federal EDA. There's some CARES dollars. Attended the St. Patrick's Day parade from my front porch. And had planning and zoning last night. Upcoming commissioner meetings and conferences.
Next week is the AMC Leadership Summit, which is March 30th through April 1st, up in the Brainerd Lakes area with it. I don't know that, I believe, Jack, you were originally registered for it and unable to attend, correct?
I registered and now I unregistered because
Okay.
of some conflicts.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we do still have some department heads attending the training.
Approval of per diems and expenses.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Adjournment of the regular board meeting. We need to reopen and come back for Drainage Authority by 10 o'clock. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. It's March 22nd of 2022. First on the agenda is to approve the agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. First on the agenda is the consent agenda and the only thing is the approval of the March 8th, 2022 Drainage Authority minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. So today we have a public hearing for County Ditch 48A. This is a potential repair project pending. If you recall, back in 2020, we did a reestablishment of records on this ditch. We had Houston Engineering do the reestablishment of records on this ditch, and then at that final hearing, there was also directed by the board for them to go ahead with a repair report to consider the drainage into Swan Lake. The field survey and inspection of the channel that demonstrates that the effectiveness of the outlet for agricultural area has diminished. And so thus it was the role that the drainage authorities asked Houston Engineering to prepare a drainage repair report, and they have completed that repair report. So Chris Otterness from Houston Engineering is here to present his repair report, and then after that we can open it up for public comment, and then I will come back up to the podium to talk about where we want to go with this and what your choices and options are from there. So I can turn it over to...
Thank you. Well, we'll open the public hearing and let welcome Chris, present his findings.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Board. Appreciate the opportunity to visit you in person. The last time I was in front of you, it was virtual for that hearing on the reestablishment of records, so it's really good to be able to sit here in front of you and chat with you about this effort that we completed. So when we complete a repair report, generally we're looking at a couple different things. One is trying to determine the level and scope of the disrepair in the ditch and the type of solutions that would be needed in order to complete that repair. And then we look at the cost of that repair and determine whether or not the solution is actually feasible. And then from there, it's going to be up to you as the board to determine whether or not the repair that we have presented here is in the best interest of the landowners, and I'll get into that in some of my final slides here. So we can go to next slide here. So as I mentioned, we analyze alternatives for the ditch repair, and in this case we looked at two different alternatives that are intended to do the same function, just using different means. Also look at the culvert sizing and condition, and in this case we only really have one culvert that we needed to analyze here. And then, as I mentioned before, we provide a recommendation for repair, and the intent is to restore the function of the ditch. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the original elevation of the ditch bottom, but the intent is to try to restore that function as much as possible to that as constructed condition. So, as a reminder where this county ditch is, CD 48A. It's generally north of Duck Lake. It's shown on the map in that yellow line here. It flows from north to south into Duck Lake, and then through Duck Lake and through a channel into Middle Lake. One important thing to know about this system is that the elevation of the water in Middle Lake is controlled by a downstream weir. We talked a little bit about that during that historic review presentation with the reestablishment of records. And the elevation of that weir is going to control the elevation of the water in the ditch for a ways upstream, all the way actually up through Duck Lake. That doesn't mean that a repair isn't feasible in this area. It just means that we need to set expectations of what the benefit is going to look like from our repair, given that we do have the elevation that controlling weir structure. And I'll show that in another follow-up slide where that relative elevation is. As I mentioned, that the ditch, it runs through a small lake here, Duck Lake, and into Middle Lake, flows through a couple of wetlands, and due to those wet conditions out on site there, using traditional excavation equipment in this particular area is going to be very challenging. We looked at options for amphibious type equipment, stuff that can generally float in order to be able to do that work. And there are a couple different options that I'll talk about here. So when we went through that reestablishment of record process, we did a survey up and down the drainage system, and what we found was that the majority of the system has been cleaned out pretty near to the bottom of the original ditch bottom. That as constructed, subsequently improved condition, we have that acronym we use frequently, the ACSIC. This graphic that we have here is shown in that channel between Duck and Middle Lake. I'll note a couple things on that graphic. The lowest dark line on there that I have labeled as the original channel bottom grade, that's what we determined from that record reestablishment process. Above that, there is a dashed line in there that is the existing channel bottom. When we completed a survey out there, we hit the top of the loose sediment that was out there. And in general, there's anywhere between 1 to 2.5 feet of loose sediment in that area of the channel. But besides that sediment, there's a lot of cattails, other vegetation that is really slowing that water down between the Duck and Middle Lake channels. And then what I have shown here in the purple line is the elevation of that permanent pool from that weir that is downstream on Middle Lake. So as far as setting expectations for how much water is going to be out there, that is going to be the bare minimum amount of water that's going to be on the channel, even if we clean that channel all the way through to that as constructed condition. So after reviewing the elevations out there on site, we do have a recommended repair, which would include removing the accumulated sediment where we have identified it in the drainage ditch and place that sediment at the top of bank. All the way along the ditch, the sediment was set over on the top of bank when it was originally constructed, so the Drainage Authority does have the ability and right to place that material back on there. There is a culvert between the Duck and Middle Lakes, and right now that culvert is several feet higher than that original channel bottom. And we understand that culvert's in relatively poor condition, so we do recommend replacing that culvert with a 54-inch culvert that would be placed at that original channel bottom between the two lakes. Having that lowered in there will help a little bit with not only flows going through there, but also being able to have some sort of cleansing velocity through there, because when you have the culvert perched in there, even though the permanent water might be near the bottom, there just isn't enough cross section there to allow water to flow through there at a good velocity there when you're having lower water conditions. There are a couple locations of bank sloughing that we've identified that we recommend being repaired. And then there are some of the floating bogs that are right at the outlet into Middle Lake that we would recommend moving, if possible, through there. And again, it's going to depend on what kind of equipment is used in the project. And it's very well possible that those bogs could regrow and come back over the ditch again. So it's one of those things that will have to be monitored. Now, there is going to be some water that flows underneath those bogs already, but it is something that tends to encourage the regrowth of cattails in the channel, which help keep a consistent flow moving through there. So if we complete these repairs that we've recommended, it will help with improved, or I should say better flow through the system, a restored flow in the system. As I've noted before, that Middle Lake weir, it's going to continue to keep that water elevation higher than that original ditch bottom. But just because that water is higher doesn't mean that we can't do something to help the water flow. And right now, the water elevation, say in Duck Lake and further upstream, is substantially higher than what the elevation of the water is, or the ultimate outflow of that Middle Lake weir. based on a field survey, we believe that that water elevation could lower water elevations under, I guess, low to moderate flows by up to 1 foot. So that's about the elevation that we found in a standing water elevation when we did our survey, is about 1 foot from Old Fort Road down to what that elevation would be in Middle Lake. And so that's what you can really gain out of this. And that, again, was in kind of low flow periods. You may be able to have even more restoration for flows when you have those higher water periods as well. As I've indicated before, those floating bogs that are at the Middle Lake outlet, if we remove that, it might help with some of that stacking of the water flows that's occurring there, particularly when you have those a more significant rainfall event. We looked at a couple different options for doing the work out here on this drainage system for the repairs. These are a couple that we know of that have the potential to restore the elevations. First of which is a floating excavator. We have a picture of this that was used on a project that we did just a year ago north of the metro on a drainage system up there. Essentially, it's kind of a standard excavator that they mount on these very large pontoon type tracks, and allows them to be able to go in areas that you otherwise wouldn't be able to go to with standard excavation equipment. And then, as you can see on this here, they mounted a long reach on there in order to be able to reach out further into the channel. There are a couple pluses and minuses out of that floating excavator. It's not intended to go over open water areas. And maybe go back to the previous slide there. That excavator is not intended to go over necessarily open water areas, but in areas where you have more vegetation and supporting material. Other thing I'll note is that it's not cheap to mobilize a piece of equipment like that. This particular piece of equipment came out of northeast Wisconsin. What we did was we worked with two different drainage authorities to coordinate efforts that they needed in order to get a machine like that out there. And so they split the cost of the mobilization that came out there. And that was one way where we were able to have a couple of those authorities working together to decrease the cost for those benefiting landowners. Next slide. This one is a piece of equipment that's referred to as a cookie cutter. Essentially, it has these flails that are in the front that you can see on the right-hand picture that stir the material around. And I understand, I believe Nate said that this piece of equipment actually was out on one of your ditches earlier last summer, if I understand correctly. And so, the idea behind that is it chops the material up and it sprays it out to the sides on either side. And when we were talking with the DNR about this project, one of the DNR staff people actually was one that had suggested maybe this might be an option for this area. So it's something that we think would be worth pursuing, getting a cost together for this. We did talk to the owner of this one particular piece of equipment. He's in northern Minnesota, and he was the one that provided us a cost estimate for this work for this particular project. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about costs, and these are all in our repair report. We estimate the cost for bringing that floating excavator in at about $108,000. That does include some engineering and legal administrative costs that we included in here. The engineering and legal administrative costs, they're just rough estimates based on the construction cost and the level of effort we're going to probably need in order to get regulatory approvals from the DNR for this work, because this is a public water. But this is at least gives you an idea of the magnitude of costs that we're looking at here. Next slide. For the cookie cutter, we estimate actually a little more cost. Again, this was based on those estimates that were provided by that contractor up in northern Minnesota, and certainly it's possible that those costs could be reduced if you're able to utilize that piece of equipment on multiple drainage systems within your county or in partnering with another adjacent drainage authority to bring that equipment down to utilize it with any work that they might be going on. So with either one of these options, I would highly recommend exploring ways to piggyback on this work with other projects you have or other local agencies so that those mobilization costs can just be spread out. And then what if you go back just to that slide real quickly, one thing I'll note is that the cost we had in here included a harvester. He has a piece of equipment that attaches on there that can harvest those weeds that get sprayed out there and that material and be able to move it, off the site or on the adjacent banks. There would be a cost savings if that isn't used, and if that's not required, that would be something that would be borne out through the regulatory process of the DNR and whether or not that would be necessary and required. So, but we include that in here for right now as a estimate, just to have be a little more conservative with our cost estimate.
Madam Chair, were you surprised that the mobilization cost was the same for the two options?
I don't know that the mobilization cost was necessarily the same, but the overall cost between the two of them was similar. I guess I didn't break it.
Well, it's broken.
What is in our report that we had broken
The chart
down?
says for mobilization, both options, $15,000.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But then it says excavation for the cookie cutter is $60,000, and excavation for the floating option was $41,000. So that seems to be the difference. The excavation itself was so much different.
Yes, yeah, and so that was based on essentially what we had gotten from those different contractors. Again, we had worked on with the excavator out of Wisconsin on that on the dredge numbers. So yeah, I was actually I thought that the cookie cutter was going to be coming in a little less, and given the volatility of construction costs that have been occurring out there and what contractors have been putting on their work, especially with how much work is out there, these costs that I have on here could swing quite a ways in either direction. I would personally recommend exploring both of those options in greater detail if you decide to order this repair, so that you can compare those costs and find the most economical solution out of the two. And like I said, those costs may come in a little lower, a little higher too, depending on if you can wrap that up into other work. Okay, and I guess I talked a little bit about where we got those numbers. Again, we're just estimating costs. There's nothing that is guaranteed in those costs, certainly. Benefiting landowner costs, what would be charged to those landowners would be based on the incurred costs. I think it's important for those landowners to know that, what they see on here, isn't, their individual price tag. It's going to be depend on what is actually incurred by the contractor. And if the contractor costs come in lower, then they won't be charged that amount, or if it comes in higher, they will be charged a little more. And I talked already a little bit about some of those other fluctuations that we might see from those costs that we had. So for time frame, we're having the hearing on this now. If you choose to move forward with this, then in sometime in the next month or two here, we do feel like it would be appropriate to move forward with bids kind of in the late spring, early summer, and potentially work on this effort, maybe late summer or early fall. That'd probably be the most feasible for construction, and especially in order to give flexibility for completing the work. Typically, especially for that amphibious excavator, it's probably going to be most practical and easiest to do this work in that late summer, early fall period when we can have the lowest water levels out there. For the cookie cutter, it probably won't matter quite so much. And then finally, we're getting to where the board can consider whether or not the repair is necessary. And there's a few items with that. Is the drainage system in need of repair? Are these recommended repairs necessary to restore that function and benefit to those landowners? And given these limitations that we have, can we achieve the outcomes that the landowners are seeking out there? And some of this we've covered in our repair report, and others, all this is a little more of a judgment call and maybe based on some input you receive from the benefiting landowners as well. And that's all I had for you today, and certainly I can answer any questions you may have before you open it up for public comment.
Commissioner Lipke has a
Yes.
question.
So the culvert was several feet higher than where it was originally placed?
Yeah, I believe the culvert is about 2 feet off that original channel bottom.
Would have that been frost or just?
It could be any number of things. We find that very frequently that culverts are placed above that original channel bottom because if the channel is in disrepair and has any sediment in it, whoever's installing the culvert doesn't have a lot of incentive to bury the culvert into the sediment if they don't know it's being removed. And we've seen it, even on county highway culverts, MnDOT culverts, where these culverts end up getting perched. And in fact, we've had many of these reestablishment of records that we've completed where we've seen over half of the culverts on a particular drainage system be over a foot higher than that original channel bottom. So that's pretty common. But again, given what the history we have and how long that culvert has been there, we're not exactly sure what the rationale was.
Second question is, the outlet on Middle Lake, is that pretty good size that we aren't going to flood anybody if we improve this?
And Nate could probably speak to the width of it, but it's a fairly substantial wide weir,
okay.
So it keeps a I would say a pretty consistent level. The only thing that would be affecting that substantially is the flow of water going into that, where there's a couple of areas where the lake kind of channelizes itself down into boggy areas, and if those boggy areas get overgrown, that can potentially have an effect on the level. So that's also something that's important to watch along there. Now, the only thing about that is that that's downstream of this drainage system. I understand that the weir itself is located on County Ditch 4, and I'm not sure exactly how far north County Ditch 4 extends, but that's kind of somewhat the limit of where the Drainage Authority has to be able to do the clean out, short of getting permission from the DNR.
Okay, my third question is probably not so much to you, but landowner wishes. We don't have a really good turnout of landowners here. But that's kind of an open question, I guess. Thank you.
My question is it better to use the excavator, or is it better to use the cookie cutter in the long term?
I would say that if the contractor that would be coming out with the excavator, if they're very confident in their ability to go all the way through and be able to get right all the way out to the outlet into the lake, I think that it might provide you a little a more sure solution, given that if they're actually reaching down and dredging the material out of the bottom of the ditch. The cookie cutter, it's really limited in its depth by whatever elevation that it's floating at. So if it's floating up above the bottom of the original ditch bottom, it's not going to be able to get all of that material. It's going to be targeted more toward getting the cattails and that sort of thing, which is the biggest part of the problem, is that vegetation. But the more sediment you have on the bottom, that can continue to promote future growth in there. And one other thing to consider in the future too is that you may consider a spraying regimen to keep some of that stuff from coming back in. And we have worked with the DNR in other locations where they've used an aquatic herbicide in these channels through these public waters to help keep some of that growth down. So that might be something that I would recommend having discussions with the DNR with as you're going through regulatory process on this, to get their take on the feasibility of doing that, and and what would be required for permitting.
Thank you. Commissioner Kolars?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, thanks for being here. You had mentioned that from the Fort Road into Duck Lake down to the Middle Lake area was a foot difference in elevation. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, it was a foot difference in water elevation when we did our survey out there
Right.
a couple of years ago.
So the southern edge of Duck into the northern entrance of Middle, what's the difference? Is that just all flat? Is that all the same level of elevation where this culvert goes?
I don't think that we necessarily did took water elevations right on either side of that culvert, so I don't think I know specifically how much of a drop or decrease there was over that culvert itself. But again, I think that there's going to be a couple different things that'll help with lowering that culvert. Again, one, it creates a little bit of that greater open area in there, and then two, it's going to, and that would be for any particular flow going through there. But two, once you get it lowered, then even under low flows, there's going to be a greater cross section for it to go through. Like if you have a low flow right now, there's only going to be maybe a couple inches in the very bottom of that where you can get the water coming through there, and so it slows velocities down in the channel, and you won't be able to keep the channel as clean with that culvert as high as it is.
So before we started digging ditches, Chris, did Duck always dump in the Middle? Or were they just a continuous body?
I'm guessing that it did. I would. I haven't looked at any aerial photos from way back then, and I would guess that I don't think there's probably any aerial photos available before the establishment of the ditch, but I'm pretty confident that it did go from Duck to Middle before the ditch was constructed.
Nathan?
We got some history on this ditch and that crossing in the file. This used to be the Martin Fanning farm, and there was an old timber bridge that used to go there across from this little channel. And part of, I think, that land sale to the DNR is they wanted a new culvert in there so they could have access to the other side of the ditch for some upland hunting. So historically, there has been some type of structure or a crossing there.
Interesting. Any additional questions from the board for Chris before we open it up for public testimony? Anyone from the public wish to speak? Jerry? It's your show.
Yeah, right. I'm learning a lot about this that I didn't know before.
We all are. Oh, Jerry, you need to come up to the mic so the recording can pick you up.
His voice will probably pick up anyway.
Thank you.
I was just looking at that corner down there where Middle and Duck comes together, and I was just going to go down in that corner of our farm, which if you go right straight down, the DNR's got a little strip along Duck Lake there, and we've got the land to the east. But there's a wood duck house, and I was going to go down there and put fresh bedding in that. But I'm going to walk out there and see where that culvert is now. I didn't realize it was that close. Now to see it on a map like this. But what I'm worried about, you can go through all of that, and if that weir, we went through that how many years ago down there that with the DNR, they wanted to raise it even more than it is right now. And I can still hear Gary Weber saying, Jace, my pasture's flooded now. What are they going to be when the cattle is losing more ground every year? That's got to go back longer than that. But anyway, you could go through all of this, and with that weir sitting where it's at, it's still going to be high water all over, backing up in our fields. down here in the very southeast corner of this map, I go down there because that's where a deer stand is, and there's about, I don't know, 3-4 acres of meandered land down there. And so we're always going down there and feeding the pheasants and checking. That water's coming in more, even though it's dry, it's seeping in more. So something's, yes, but that's on Middle Lake, and if that's holding up and coming in there, I don't know. This cleaning without checking and changing that level of that weir, I don't know if we're going to accomplish a whole lot. That's what I can see right now until an expert can tell me different.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Nick.
So at this point, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for further discussion.
I do have a couple other questions too before we go on, like procedurally where we're at. Was there any DNR permitting needed to be involved in this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're going to need to have some regulatory coordination with the DNR. I think that it likely would require, at a minimum, a letter of permission from the DNR. We haven't moved forward with that until we know which way the board would like to go with this. But certainly there will need to be that regulatory coordination, either in form of that letter of permission or a permit, most likely.
Okay, so my question then is procedurally for the board, if they are to order a repair, would it be conditional of the letter of permission from the DNR? Would we do that first before the order?
I think that you probably would make that conditional on the order itself, and I guess your county attorney could weigh in on that as well. But I think that you probably would want to have some sort of decision by the board that would indicate that this repair, we still need to get it through that phase from the DNR before we can actually execute the work.
Okay. My next question before the board's decision is the options 1 and options 2 at this time. If an order is done today, what option? Because you were saying that there could be some thought about maybe using that machine for other projects that could possibly lower this project. So would the board decide on one option, or option 1 or option 2 today?
Yeah, and I actually probably would recommend that if the board is going to move forward with this, that they not specify a means, but rather, order staff and or the engineer to weigh multiple options and come back with a cost after a bidding process. So.
Mm-hmm. And my final question for Chris right now is to talk about possibly entering a contract or agreement, if you could explain how that would look like going forward.
Sure. So when we started this process with you, we engaged in a contract with you to do 2 things. One was to complete the work necessary to reestablish a public drainage system record, and then to complete a repair report and attend this public hearing with you. So our contract will be complete with you after today, and how we would work with you following up on this, if you choose to move forward, is that we can engage again with you on a follow-up contract that would include a few different items. One would be assisting with getting those quotes for this work that would be completed. We could assist with construction observation, and we could do regulatory coordination on your behalf with the DNR. Now, there are a couple things that we can guarantee on our cost, like developing a final spec and quote package and bidding it out. There are other things that we can't necessarily provide a guaranteed cost for you, like the regulatory, because you never know when you're coordinating with the DNR or other regulating authority what I guess information they're going to require for you or hoops to jump through on that. But we can give you an estimate on that. One thing we'll let you know is that from this process we've already completed with you in our contract, we did hold to that contract amount that we provided to you. We actually incurred quite a bit more cost and effort than what we had in our contract, because there were some things with the documentation that we didn't anticipate that would be occurring. But since we contracted with you, we're going to hold that. We aren't going to keep on billing you. So that is one thing that we do with our contracting, is that if we're going to provide you a number like that, that's a not to exceed. We won't exceed for that particular item. It's just those items like the regulatory, which are too nebulous that we can provide an estimate but can't provide a fixed cost for that part.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Sure.
The cookie cutter, if you do not harvest it, which harvesting means just throwing it over onto the shore, doesn't that just multiply that bog problem downstream? Because isn't that chopped up vegetation going to find its way down there?
Yeah, I think that it's it's one of those things that we'll have to have additional conversation with the DNR and the operator of that cookie cutter on how they've seen these projects work. But I think that it would be certainly a bigger concern if you were doing part of a much longer channel. But given that it's the material would be going out into Middle Lake, which is a little larger of a water body. Presumably that's going to end up on one of the wind-blown shores over there, and certainly that is something to consider, and that's one reason why we did include that part of it in our cost.
Now, if you would do this today, you would recommend the excavator or not?
I would say if both costs were even, I would say doing the excavator. But it's one of those things you never know if one or the other of those companies, or certainly there's going to be maybe some other companies that do this sort of thing. The availability might not be there, and I recommend keeping your options open on this.
And could you use a normal excavator if you did it in January?
That's a good question. I would say in this instance, probably not.
Okay.
We have had a number of contractors that do a little more iffy work with an excavator in January, but I believe you would be challenged to find anybody that would be comfortable with this case just because of how wet it is.
Thank you.
So that could be hairy.
Yeah.
So the excavator has to be removed and stored someplace for a number of months? Is it, or does it remain there?
Presumably, if you hired a contractor to come over, they would complete the work on your project and be able to demobilize immediately. Now, whether that would be demobilizing to another site you might be working on, or one of your next door neighbors, it'll depend on how that all gets contracted and how much work they have in the area. I would guess that even if you didn't work with another drainage authority or on any of the other systems, they probably would be maybe seeking out or marketing to others in the area for those services.
So we're renting the excavator?
No.
You're hiring them out, and they would in turn bring their equipment out.
Okay. So our next option is to either order the repair or have staff prepare the order for our next meeting, or do it now.
Madam Chair, you could make the findings verbally, and then we would come back with written findings at the next meeting. You'd also have to need to make the decision about whether you're going to follow the recommendation about keeping your options open of using one of the two options presented, the excavator or the cookie cutter method, I certainly would recommend to the board that you make the order for repair conditional upon obtaining the necessary regulatory approval. But in order for you to move forward, you would have to conclude then, as outlined in the presentation, that the repair was necessary, that it's necessary to restore the functioning of the system, and that the repair will accomplish the intended outcome that the landowners are seeking, which is to hopefully improve the flow of the system itself.
Thank you. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Madam Chair, Jack, can we say again, how did we get to this point that we got this report?
So the board did there was concern from landowners about the level of that culvert and the drainage into Duck and Middle. And so it was inconclusive about where that really was because our records were incomplete. Mm-hmm. And at that time is when the board ordered the reestablishment, because we knew that the reestablishment had to happen regardless. Now that the reestablishment is done, the step 2 is to continue on that process of the culvert and the drainage into the two lakes. And so then the board did order to do a repair report, and so here we are with that. Does that answer your question?
It does, if I may. I'm not in a position today to make a decision as to whether we should go forward with the repair, in that I think there's new information in terms of the two types of excavation options. We have the cost now, or a range of costs, and we heard from one individual, Jerry spoke about, well, not so sure that this actually fixes our problem. I just feel I would feel better if landowners had an opportunity to see what we learned today,
and to see what it's going to cost them.
Potentially.
Madam Chair, I know of 2 additional landowners that have been boisterous and concerned about this project, and in fact, kind of the push for the project. Neither of those 2 landowners are here today. If it's an option to continue the hearing to the next meeting and maybe bring in those additional landowners to that to make a better decision on what this really does and what will this fix what we're looking for, because this is a large repair, 140,000, and so I think our timeline would still be okay to push it, because if we're looking for a fall, but we could maybe, if there's any other information that the board is wanting to get during that time, we could present that, and we could even put together preliminary findings on that as well, although they would probably be still approved at the next meeting. It's hard to put findings together at the exact same meeting. So that would be an option that I would recommend, possibly, on the comfort level of the board.
Madam Chair, do you remember roughly how many acres are going to be benefited by this?
The number of benefit, I do have the number of the cost benefit. The benefits for that system is $661,000, and that was recently redetermined in 2021. So that's a pretty new number. It's not a huge system because the numbers are smaller. I don't know if I have the acreage in here.
Yeah, I don't have it in my...
I did not bring my redetermination file with me, but I can certainly get back to you, Commissioner Lukey, on the number. Yeah, and we can report that then.
Because there's some people think they're going to get by for $300 an acre that ends up being $2,000 an acre. They're going to have a different attitude.
Is this the report I'm looking for? Including land and roads, 997.
Okay, 1,000 acres. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
It would be nice to hear from landowners.
Yes.
I agree.
want a motion to continue to our next meeting?
Madam Chair, I think, was written notice given to landowners of this hearing today?
Correct.
And so do we know why other additional landowners aren't here? Do we have any sense of that?
Do I know why they are not here? I do not.
I just wanted to make sure the board was aware that they were all given written notice of this hearing.
Mhm.
But we didn't know the cost estimate then, when that letter went out.
We did. We had
Oh, you did?
the repair report. We didn't do this until after the repair report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, what are the wishes of the board?
I'm sorry, did the landowners get the repair report? We knew about it, did they get it?
The notice does not require that we send the entire land or repair report in there. It's there is a number to contact our office for questions and concerns prior to the meeting, or they come to the public hearing about it.
Right.
But no, we don't include the entire report on that.
All right, thank you.
We need a motion to continue if we're going to continue.
I'll move to continue to our next scheduled meeting.
Second.
Madam Chair, if I may, I believe that would take us to April 12th. And we do have, what else do we have?
Redistricting? No, it's later.
Redistricting is on the 19th.
Okay.
I don't see any other public hearings that I haven't invited.
You're right,
for.
we were considering redistricting on that day, and it's also election day. So no, I think that day is open, yeah. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have any other public hearings that day at 10.
I'm open that day.
Chris is available.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, on the motion, I'm just not prepared to vote in favor of moving forward. I'm uncomfortable on the dollar amount, and I'm uncomfortable on the point that Jerry raised about the weir on Middle Lake, and what's going to happen to the water level? I know, Mr. Artis, you did say something about the water being able to spread out, I think, a bit, but it's not going to necessarily lower the water amount.
Oh, no.
So the effect of the repair would be to lower the water levels in Duck Lake and further upstream. We will be able to get some lowering of water levels, but not all the way down to the original channel bottom. And again, the system really is subject to that weir. And under a repair proceeding, there's nothing that the Drainage Authority can do about that weir.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, is there additional information the board would want to have further presented for that next hearing? Are there specific questions? I just want to ensure that we cover that for the next hearing.
I think we're good on our information. It's looking for that landowner input. And hopefully we'll hear from them between now and then or at that meeting.
And Madam Chair, what I would recommend is that our office send out an additional notice. It's not required. This isn't a large system with landowners, not a large cost, but to send a notice out letting them know that this was going to be continued at the time that the Drainage Authority sets, and to contact our office and possibly reach out to some of those key landowners.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that being said, there's nothing else in front of the Drainage Authority, so we can
Continue until April 12th?
the public hearing is continued,
Right.
but the Drainage Authority meeting
At 10 o'clock?
At 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Do we need to vote on that?
All those in favor?
Aye.
And now we can close the Drainage Authority meeting.
Move to adjourn?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.